Thank you so much for joining this session today on reaching and equipping our next generation of open source developers. First things first, my name is Grace Jansen. I'm afraid most of this presentation is about Canadian universities. Unfortunately, the guys who were supposed to be presenting this today weren't able to travel here, so instead you have me, who I'm definitely not Canadian, definitely British, but hopefully you'll still enjoy this session and learn a bit about the programs that we're running and we're helping to run within IBM through our team over in Canada. I am a developer advocate at IBM, mostly looking at open source Java technologies, hence why I'm here at this conference. And so I kind of help out with this where I can, but it's mostly the Canadian teams who are helping. So a bit of an introduction into the program itself. So the program itself is called CANOSP, and essentially this stands for Canada Open Source Project. And this was started a few years back in 2019. And basically this is about bringing together students from Canadian universities to work on open source projects. And this is actually part of their core curriculum. They will get a mark for this, and essentially that mark goes towards their final grade for their degree. So this is all about sort of getting open source communities to submit projects that students can help contribute to, and matching that up with students from these universities. So the projects that we've had working here before include the Eclipse Foundation. So there have been projects within that, including OpenJ9, and things like the LSP, so the language servers for Jakarta EE. And we've also had things like Adoptium, IBM, Mozilla, Keyman, Review Board. So there's lots of different open source projects involved. Currently, so far, this program has had 4 universities, but most recently 3 universities participating in this program, and they are based in Canada, hence the name, the Canada Open Source Program. So that includes the University of Alberta, the University of British Columbia, and McGill University. So a brief history of CANOS as a program. So this isn't the first open source based program that was started back in Canada. Actually the first one was called UCOSP, and that actually standard for Undergraduate Capstone Open Source Projects. So that was started way back in the University of Toronto back in 2008, and that ran for about 10 years until 2018, but unfortunately it just kind of fizzled out and they stopped running it. And that was a real shame because it started to pick up interest from other universities like the University of Alberta. And they'd started to get in touch with some of the professors in Toronto asking, can we get involved with this program? Is this a way we can share this program? And actually it's those professors that were originally involved and some of the mentors who were originally involved in that original program who then said, why don't we use the momentum of this program, use the momentum we've already created to make this a Canada-wide program and include multiple universities. So that's how the CANOS program kind of started up, is sort of following on from that UCOS program that they had previously and expanding it past just the University of Toronto to include other universities. So that happened in the fall of 2019, and these are some of the pictures from that very first initialization of the project. So in the first year, they had quite a small cohort. It was just 8 students, and they actually only had students from the University of Alberta in their first run of this program. That continued to the second run. They only had University of Alberta students again, but this time expanding to 12 students large. And that was in the winter of 2020. And this was all part of something called Startup Edmonton, so that's where it was run. And then following on from that, they sort of started reaching out to other universities in Canada saying, would you like to get involved with this? Would you like to participate? And that's when they got other universities like McGill and the University of British Columbia involved. And so they started reaching out and sort of expanding the program more and more. They originally had done this in person, but unfortunately, due to the pandemic, as most of us had to, they moved to virtual, as we all did when working. So for the last couple of iterations, this has been virtual, and that includes things like the code hackathon that starts this whole thing off. And actually, so far since the program started, they have successfully been able to help 77 students in total from 4 different universities in 5 cohorts. So although it's still a relatively new program, we've still been able to get 77 students through this program. As I mentioned, there are lots of different projects that we've gotten the students to work on, and really the technologies they're working on depends on the cohort and depends on what technologies are submitted. So really it could be anything. It just depends on what open source projects we get in that best match the students that we have available. So we have the Eclipse Adoptium, for example, Eclipse AQAvit. We've also got Eclipse OMR, OpenJ9, like I mentioned, the JIT server. We've had those before, and the language server for Eclipse Jakarta EE. Those are all Eclipse projects that have been involved and that students have actively worked on. As I mentioned, it's not just Eclipse, so if you don't have an Eclipse project, you're more than welcome to submit something else, or more than welcome to submit an Eclipse one. So other ones include things like Review Board by Beanbag, Predictive Text Studio, Performance Robustness Evaluation for statistical classifiers. So there's lots of different projects that we get them to work on, basically anything that is open source and they can actively contribute to. As I mentioned, different universities, so we've had Alberta, British Columbia, McGill, and most recently we've had the University of Calgary join as well. So lots of different universities involved. And the process looks a little bit like this. Now the projects are either run in the fall semester, so from September until December, or they're run in the spring cohort, so you're looking at January to April, so you can see the alternate dates there depending on which cohort you join. The way it works is we start off with an application process. So this is kind of before the term starts. Now the students that really are joining this program are usually in either their penultimate or their final year. So they're already at the university, so usually they'll be asked the year before if they want to do this module. They then have to start the application process. The general requirements for this particular program are that you are in an upper level software engineering program. When I heard that, I didn't have a clue what it was. It means penultimate or final year. So just basically, you're not starting out in university, you've had a couple of years under your belt. And also that you have a very competitive overall GPA. Really what we're looking for here is students that have the drive and the motivation that they're actually going to take part in this program, actively contribute to open source, and aren't just going to drag their feet going through the whole thing. So it is a very competitive program to get onto. Usually they'll only take 5 to 10 students from each university, so it is quite competitive to get places onto this program. And so thus we tend to say those that are sort of doing well academically and are interested and have the drive are the ones that we want participating in this program. Now, university or faculty members can specifically add additional requirements, but that's up to the university to do. Those are just the general requirements that are set by the program leaders. And then once we have the applications from the students, we then go on to try and pick the open source projects. So these, as I mentioned, these projects change from cohort to cohort. It depends which projects are submitted. And if you want to submit a project, then I'll show you the page to do so at the end of this presentation. It's just a Google Doc form, so it's actually quite easy to do. But what you do need to do is make sure that there's a mentor as well available for each of the projects. So what the students will have is a mentor from their university, so they'll have a professor who is in charge of this module, and they're the ones who are going to be giving the overall grade at the end, but they will also have industry mentors, and these are mentors from the open source projects that are submitted, and they're the ones who will have regular meetings with the students, help to direct their sort of development work in this space, answer questions, and they'll also provide feedback as well to the students and the professors to help influence those grade marks as well. So yeah, any onboarding projects are basically have an onboarding process, and then they're reconfirmed. So sometimes we'll have projects that come over from previous years that have been with us in this program for a number of years. So the language server is one, for example. Other times it will be a brand new open source project we've never come across before. And both are fine, both are great. In fact, the more open source projects we have to choose from, the more students we can take onto the course and enable through this program. And as I said, we've been really lucky to get some great projects for the students to be able to work on. So once the semester begins, once we've confirmed the projects and received all the student nominations, we will then start matching up and reviewing the student nominations and sort of finalizing which students are going to be in which cohorts working on which projects. Now, what we deliberately do is try and make sure that we have students working from different universities on the same project, because this is meant to be simulating real life. in real life, you're probably not working with people who you went to college with or university with. You're probably working with people from different countries, different parts of the country, working in a distributed manner, and that's what we're trying to mimic here. We're trying to give students an experience and sort of work experience, basically, in the real world of enterprise development in open source. So often these will be cohorts that exist between multiple university cohorts as well. So the students that are accepted, as I say, it is quite a high criteria to get in. We then review the projects they will review the projects that are offered, and they will actually rank them. So we do try and take that into consideration, because obviously each of us has different interests, and depending on the projects that are available, you might prefer one over the other. So that is taken into consideration when we do the review process as well. So about a week before the semester begins, the students are then given their assigned projects so that they can start researching and start preparing for their term. And they're actually linked up with their mentors at the same time. And at this time, the mentors might give them resources, for example, like documentation, frameworks to review, tools to install, etc. So really just preparing them to make sure they have everything set up that they need to get started right when the term starts. So that all happens about a week before. And then once the semester begins, we have this kickoff code sprint. So this happens about the second weekend of their semester. We get everyone together. We used to do it in person. It's been virtual over the last few years, hoping to, at one point, go back to being in person, hopefully, once sort of everyone is comfortable with it. And in this, we basically have sort of, it's essentially like a hackathon. So it's a hackathon to get started with their projects. So this is an opportunity for the mentors to really introduce them to the key processes that are going to be involved. How do they create an issue? How do they create a PR? Should they be using branches? Should they have their own? So it's basically introducing them to where is the code installed? How do they get started? And really spending that weekend diving deep into what are the challenges they're going to be solving, what are the problems they're going to be solving, what is the timeline for that, and having that time to ask their mentor any questions they might have about the project. So this is really the main kickoff event that we have. On the Sunday, the students actually get a chance to then present back what they've been able to achieve during the hackathon. That will all include coding, but it will also include sort of the project management side of things for the project as well. Because, again, we are trying to teach them skills that they might not necessarily have from a more traditional module, and that includes things like time management, project management, setting goals, all things that we need to do within our careers as developers. We're trying to also teach them through this process as well. So they'll then present that and get feedback on that, and then after this initial kickoff code, we essentially start the main development process of the module, and this lasts a couple of months. You can see sort of from October to the end of November, and this is when the students essentially have to get down to work and start coding their projects, start coming up with their solutions. And this is still under that direction of those mentors from the open source projects. So each team will hold weekly meetings where they essentially talk about their progress. They talk about things like the list of tasks that they have to do, and they also get things like feedback from their mentors on how they've done so far, and also sort of the direction they're going in, if it's correct or not. If they have any questions, they'll have that opportunity to ask in that weekly meeting. It gives the students an opportunity to get regular feedback, just like we expect in our careers, from what is essentially their mentor, but in real life might be our managers, for example, on our performance, on how we're doing, on our direction. Again, we're trying to mimic what we'd have perhaps in weekly scrums, and give them that sort of more agile experience. And also, to also get some encouragement, because it can be tough when you're maybe used to having an assignment that's set with a due date and you know exactly what you're doing. Going into a project like this, it's up to you to set the goals, it's up to you to pick the problem. So it's a lot more independent, and so having these weekly meetings provides them with that structure to sort of more gently introduce this style of working, if that makes sense. So it can be a great opportunity to have encouragement and also sort of ask questions if they need to. Any newly introduced cohorts are also now taking part in these social nights, which we are organizing. So these social nights are held on the third Friday of each month, and it's just basically an opportunity for the students to kick back, relax, but also network and have an opportunity to meet the other students who might be in other projects who are also on the program. And we sort of encourage this because it's obviously important not just to work hard, but also to use this opportunity to meet other mentors, to meet other students, and to expand their network, especially because these students are graduating soon. So if they can expand their network when they leave, then they can have a greater chance of success, whether that be finding a job or perhaps finding other opportunities outside once they've graduated. Finally, at the end of the semester, the whole cohort will essentially come back together for their final presentation, and they're going to cover things like what they've accomplished, what they've learned, what they might do differently next time, and perhaps what they would suggest as a future in terms of where they take the project next for perhaps next year's cohort, if we get the same open source project. Students are then given their final feedback. So this includes the project mentors giving feedback to the universities on how they performed, what they've accomplished, etc., to the universities. And as I mentioned, it is that faculty member from the university who is going to make that final decision on their grade marks. So that all happens in this final feedback stage. So in terms of the benefits of this program, there are obviously benefits not just to the students, but also to the open source projects. So one of the most obvious benefits that the open source projects get is new contributors. So in the previous editions of CANOSP, we've had anywhere between 3 and 6 new contributors for each project, and often they carry that on into their final year or after they finish in graduation. Another thing is we have this continuous and active development. So because we're having new cohorts come in every sort of fall and spring, we're having continuous and active development going on within these open source projects, really keeping them vibrant and enabling us to enact new innovations within them almost all the time. It's also enabling us to have increased community awareness of these open source projects. And that's not just within universities. So the fact that these students can then talk to their peers, present within their universities, does help us to raise awareness of these internally, but also we often encourage the cohorts who are working on these open source projects to present externally as well. So for example, with the language server project for Jakarta EE, we've actually gotten them to present in the Jakarta EE Tech Talks, and at IBM we have a Think Friday, which is our education sessions for IBM. So we encourage them to also present at these external events, which again spreads awareness of the community outside of the university as well, and gives these students some fantastic experience presenting to development audiences that they might not necessarily have had otherwise. And community give back. So as mentors, we have the opportunity to give back to these students, to utilize our skill sets and our knowledge and our expertise to enable skill development in the next generation, and to give back to ensure that these projects are going to continue even if we stop working on it, or just to ensure that we have that increased innovation from this next generation. When it comes to the students themselves, obviously there is a fantastic opportunity here to get an introduction into real open source projects that they might actually be using in their job afterwards, and to get insight into how enterprise organizations make use of open source. Even things like what's involved in terms of the processes that they then might use even if they're not working on open source after university. So they get an opportunity to have this direct relationship with a mentor, which is one of the huge benefits of this program, because sometimes when you're new to open source, for example, it can be quite overwhelming or perhaps intimidating going and just doing your first commit to an open source project. So this program helps to lower that barrier to entry by providing that sort of gentle introduction, that mentor that they can ask questions to, and ensure they're doing the right process without feeling intimidated or scared necessarily to really get stuck in. So it's a great reduction in that barrier to entry. It allows them to develop technical skills in projects that they might not have even had a chance to get involved in otherwise, and use technologies that they might never have used either. Expand their professional network, so that includes both the students from other universities, because it's a fantastic opportunity to meet other people who are interested in similar technologies who aren't in their particular class or cohort, but it also allows them to expand their network in terms of their mentors from these companies, and also other mentors when they go to the social events. And it gives them experience, importantly, of working in a distributed environment. a lot of us work for global corporations or global companies, and we work with people who aren't in our time zone, aren't in our country, they're not in our city. So being able to work effectively in a virtual way, especially after the pandemic, is a critical skill for the next generation of developers to be comfortable doing and to develop themselves. In terms of lessons learned from running this program, time management, we found, is a key skill that is often that needs to be developed within these students when they participate in this program, because, as I mentioned, this is a very different program to what might be a traditional module or course at their university. They might, at their university, have midterms and a final exam, or perhaps coursework to do throughout. Normally that coursework is really concrete and set out at the beginning, so students have a very clear expectation of, right, I need to do this, then this, then this, then this, and I need to do it on these dates when the university is set. Whereas actually, when it comes to a project like this, they have to be a lot more independent when it comes to their time management, and we have to be a lot more aware as mentors of really enabling them to develop those skills, to give them that independence and that guidance, and encourage them to keep to a timetable, to set a timetable, and to really scope the work, just like we would do in sprints, for example. So it does give them some critical skills that they wouldn't otherwise gain from just a generic course or module. Another one that leads on to that is communication. So being able to communicate clearly and openly about any potential issues that might arise, but also about other time commitments that they might have. So they might have a particular assignment that's due in, or maybe they're at a conference one week, so they can't actually deliver code. So we need to be enabling them to have that active and open communication methods to be able to give that back to the team so that the team doesn't set false expectations. And that's something that, again, is a key skill that should be used within our careers as well, that we have to learn as well. There's also embracing diverse skill sets. So this is something we've definitely picked up that is critically important to this project, but also to make sure that the students are aware of when they enter their career as well. And this is something that I particularly relate to. I came from a biology degree, so I didn't do software engineering at university and got thrown into the wild west of Java. And that was a steep learning curve. And when I joined, I wasn't sure that what I could bring to a project like that, or to a team, especially when I was younger than the language I was using. So it was kind of intense and a lot to take on all at once. But it's that embracing of diverse skills. So I have skills that other people who maybe did a comp sci degree might not have. And we try and encourage that same mindset within this project. Everyone has different backgrounds, everyone has different skill sets, you have different interests. Some of our students might be more interested in web development and front end, others might be more interested in the really deep nitty-gritty stuff, maybe others are interested in the human-computer interaction. And it's about matching up those skill sets, matching up that diversity to enable us to create teams that are really effective and can work together to be able to complete these open source projects. So we really do try to embrace that and ensure that our teams are diverse in their backgrounds and their skill sets and their interests as well. And then the final one is agile. So remembering that, unlike a more traditional module, this can develop. So as you go along the project, you might find out that actually the students' goals might change partway through. And it's about being okay with that, being agile, and enabling them to develop those agile skills that they'll have to use when they go into software development too. And so this is, again, a key skill set that we try and encourage within the program that, again, they can take into their careers afterwards as well. We've had some really successful projects that have been part of this program. I've mentioned this one a lot. So this is the Eclipse language server for Jakarta EE. And essentially, hopefully most of you are familiar with Jakarta EE. It is a subset of APIs that are enabling cloud-native Java development. And this is the language server that's been developed for it to really enable developers to easily utilize Jakarta EE. And we've had several cohorts working on this project, and they have done a fantastic job. We've actually had them presenting at the Jakarta EE Tech Talks about it, and at the IBM Think Fridays as well. And yeah, it's just been a fantastic opportunity for us, sort of a mutually beneficial relationship for us to enable us to develop this project. And actually, through the CANOSP program, we were able to get it to a stage where it was accepted by the Eclipse Foundation. So it's through the work that these students did that we were able to get to that point. And we were able to then teach our students about Jakarta EE, which is a very important sort of tool to be using if you're looking at going into Java development in the enterprise after graduation. So it's fantastic for us to be able to sort of swap those skill sets and that learning when we were doing this project. So this was a fantastic opportunity for us and a really clear example of how we within IBM and we as mentors could equip that next generation for open source development. And as I mentioned, there's lots of different projects, and we've been quite lucky that even though this is a fairly relatively new program, we have already got alumni. So actually, one of the guys who runs this program is an alumni of the original USORPS program that I mentioned earlier. And so a lot of our alumni come back and are mentors for us in the future, which is quite a nice sort of circle of development there, going from mentee to mentor. And this is one of our alumni, Catherine, who actually worked on the review board project, and actually from her work on the review board project, she met her mentor, and through that connection was able to prepare herself for work, and is now actually, she finds herself as a software engineer at Mozilla working on this. So through this module and through these connections that she created and this experience that she gained, she was then able to get a job after university working at this software company. So this is just one example of where we've been able to have a significant impact and clearly been able to influence positively the students' lives, not just during the project, but afterwards as well, and give them what they need, the skill sets they need to go and do this work afterwards. So if you want to get involved with CANOSP yourself, we would welcome you to, or if you just want to check out the program because you might want to create something similar at your own universities or in your own communities, we definitely encourage you to check out the CANOSP website. You can go to canosp.ca, there it is, to check out more information about it. There is also an email address on here to the two guys who run the program in Canada if you do want to get in touch with them to find out anything else about the program. We've also got previous alumni on there, so you can find out more about what they worked on and how it's influenced them going forwards, and all of the other projects that we've done from each of the cohorts we've had before. And then, oh yeah, and if you do want to have a go in suggesting an open source program, which we would love to have, you know, it's not limited to people who are based in Canada. We want to make this as global as possible, so if you are interested in submitting your own open source project, there's a Google Doc form that you can access through this website where you can submit your projects there. As long as they're open source, we welcome them, so if you are interested, please, please, please do submit. We'd love to see your projects there and get some more diversity of the projects as well. If you are interested in finding out more and you want specific contacts, the two at the top are the guys who run this program. They are the CANOSP's organizers. They are professors at the university, so you can either access them through their university accounts or through their Twitter here. And then Catherine and YK are two of the mentors who are involved with the IBM projects that I mentioned. So Catherine specifically helps a lot on the language server for Jakarta EE and mentored that team. So if you want to find out what it's like to be a mentor, then I definitely recommend getting in touch with them as well. And their Twitter's on here as well. They're pretty active on there. So with that, I'm going to say thanks very much for listening. Hopefully, I've inspired you to at least consider either getting involved or maybe thinking about something similar for your own communities. And yeah, that you will also take the time to help equip our next generation of open source developers. Thanks very much for listening. Does anyone have any burning questions? I've just stunned you all into silence. Yeah. Yes?
During the Corona period, the virtual organization, did you use tools like Workadventure or something like that? Do you know that?
So I know that they used the usual sort of video conferencing software, so you know, Zoom, WebEx, whatever the company or mentors wanted to use that the university could also use. So sometimes it was Teams, because a lot of universities used that as well. In terms of management, I'm not sure what they used in terms of like tracking issues. I think that depended on each project. again, the tools that they're using will depend on the mentors and the projects. I don't know specifically what tools they were using during COVID, but I know the generics. But if you want to find out more, Catherine was involved during the pandemic time. So you could always reach out to Catherine and ask her about what specifically she was using in the LSP for Jakarta E. Yeah, sorry, I don't know more. Cool. Any others? No? Cool. Well, I'll let you get to lunch early. Thanks so much for listening, guys. Appreciate it.